Welcome to the Mango Publishing Heart Wisdom panel. I'm Sherry Richert Belul, author of Say It Now, 33 Creative Ways to Say I Love You to the most important people in your life. And we have a really, I think this is going to be a very thought-provoking and meaningful conversation today about how to bridge our differences. And we have Joe Bailey and David Kundtz here, both of whom have written really powerful books. And I know Bree will be putting the links in the chat. And if you don't have these books, this is the time to get them. We were all just saying before we went live that with all of the events, especially the most recent yesterday, that have been heartbreaking and that seem to cause even more anger and more decisiveness, that this conversation is really important. So I just want to start us off with something that I read in Joe's book that just seemed like a great place to start. And then David is going to lead us in a stopping exercise, which I'm really grateful for that, David. So this is from Thriving in the Eye of the Hurricane, Joe's book. Resilience is the capacity of human beings to respond in the moment to any challenge they face with insightful, innovative, and creative thinking, and to rebound more quickly when they lose their bearings. It's also the ability to envision new possibilities and solutions, regardless of the circumstances. In times of turmoil and challenges, we are prompted to tap into our innate resilience and learn to survive, and yes, even to thrive. When we respond with stress, fear, and a sense of being overwhelmed, our thinking often becomes muddled and we can't see the situation with clarity. When we are able to keep our emotional balance in the face of adversity, we are better able to effortlessly rise to the occasion with courage and grace. And I just think we could use a lot of courage and grace in the world right now. And that struck me of where Joe was sort of pointing to with that. And so I'll have both Joe and David introduce themselves in just a moment. But first, David, can we call on you for a little stopping?
Sure. Okay, begin by just taking a couple of nice deep breaths. And then let your eyes softly close. And turn your energy inward. Inward energy. And for a moment or so, just be still. No images, no words, a blank slate, empty, be still, alone, inward. So gradually come back to the moment. Let your eyes open. That was about a minute of silence. Sometimes it seems like a long, long time. And what you notice is that it's very difficult to have no images and no words. Words and images are what we deal with all the time. And so it's a challenge. Very often we're told by those who know wisely when you have a distraction, when you're meditating or being still, let the distraction come and then let it go. Let it come, let it go. Don't fight it. My conviction is notice the distractions. Note them because they might have something for you. Then let them go because they come for some reason. They're there to give you something. That's an example of a stopping, a still point. There's so many ways to do it, but that's one. Thank you.
That was such a gift, David. I love that. And I love the power of 1 minute, like if we can, I certainly felt that still point and I felt like a grounding. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I'd love to have you start by introducing yourself since we sort of had that small experience from your book.
Okay, yeah, my name is David Kundtz, and I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio. Went to school at Georgetown in Washington and came out west 40 years ago and live in California and have become a West Coast boy. Just went back to Cleveland to visit family and my high school reunion, which was a bust because they tried to put 3 years together because of COVID, so nobody came. Anyway, I have family members that are on the opposite political side of the fence. And so this topic is very germane to me right now because I find it very challenging. These members of the family who are very different politically, but I think it's only politically than I am. So what we do is avoid the topic, which I think is not always bad to do. At least it gives you some time to operate. So I'm anxious to get into this topic a little more. I'm also an author. I've written 7 books, most of which are published by Canary Press, now Mango. And so, yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
I love that. And David, do you happen to have your book there, The Art of Stopping?
Oh, yes.
Let's just show everybody the beautiful, I love that cover. I think it's so beautiful.
See, Brenda, they love the cover. Brenda and I go round and round about covers.
After Joe introduces himself, maybe Brenna can jump in and give us a little backstory. So Joe, hi, welcome to you as well.
Thank you. So I'll just say briefly a little bit about myself. I got into this field of psychology. I'm a clinical psychologist. Originally, when I was 16, I really discovered that when I was an exchange student in Central America in a war-torn country, that I wanted to alleviate suffering in the world somehow. That calling, that experience brought that out in me. And as a Catholic, I went into seminary to become a priest after high school, which didn't last very long. But I still wanted to help people, so I went in and pursued a career as a clinical psychologist, and eventually did a degree in undergraduate and graduate level. But I always felt like psychology had half the answer and spirituality had half the answer, but the mind and our spirit are really just one. And so I always felt kind of schizophrenic. I would be interested in meditating and studying Zen and studying yoga and doing all that while I was practicing family systems theory and taking people through their stuff. So, but when I was in my early 30s, I was by then pretty burned out as a therapist, discouraged with the results. Felt like it was like a treadmill. People kept coming back again and again with another issue and another issue and another issue. They weren't really finding their mental health, their resilience. And so I ran into a person who had an enlightenment experience, whose enlightenment led to discoveries in psychology that focused on the three principles that underlie the science of psychology. And it unified the spiritual and the psychological as mind being spiritual. It's invisible. It's not the brain. It's beyond the brain. And it transformed me first. I became lighthearted again instead of so serious and cynical. I found a vocational renewal. I absolutely loved my work. My patients were getting well quickly. And it wasn't too long before I had to form an institute and train therapists. And it's been quite an interesting magic carpet ride, traveling all over the world, teaching these principles, many countries, continents around the planet, to corporations, to CEOs, to school systems, prisons, healthcare systems. I work with Mayo Clinic and University of Minnesota Med School. So it's the principles kind of travel well because they apply to everything, because we all have a mind and we can either use it or misuse it, can use it wisely or misuse it. So my work is really just as a therapist and as an educator is educating about how the mind works. And once we understand that, our resilience, like a beach ball, floats back up to the surface because it's not being held down with habitual, unnecessary, divided thinking, rather thinking that is from no thought. From, David's beautiful exercise, when we go into a state of no thought, which is what meditation is about, in my opinion, that's when we get inspiration. That's when we see life through divine eyes, through wisdom, we could call it. And so in these times, just with what's happening in Ukraine, what an extraordinary example of resilience we see in the Ukrainian people. So regardless of circumstances, no matter how many hardships people have, resilience is always there, ready to pop to the surface. It's there and available to us. We just have to have an understanding. So that's what my work is all about. It's now mostly educating therapists and educators and other people about these principles. And I was with Canary as well for my last book, Fear Proof Your Life. And then I've written 4 others that I wrote with HarperCollins. That's how, and actually it's how Brenda's and my path crossed long ago with Tom Grady, a few others when we were both at Harper San Francisco. And that's where my first book was The Serenity Principle on Addiction. And Slowing Down to the Speed of Life, I wrote with Dr. Richard Carlson, the Don't Sweat the Small Stuff author, who's passed on, but was my best friend. So anyway, I'm really looking forward to the conversation today, and just how our work, David's and my work, can help people see beyond our differences. I have the same issue in my family, David, as you do. I think we all families do, that they're politically divided, and between the internet and that it works politically for people to divide people. That's how you divide and conquer. But we really need to come together to solve the huge issues that we face in climate and political division, the economy, the violence, all of this. It's all a big misunderstanding. So the solution is very simple and very available, but the problems are very complex. So that's what I hope to alleviate suffering in the world through raising the level of consciousness and understanding in people about how to use this thing in its most efficient, loving, compassionate manner. So that's what I'll share. I've got a bunch of stories to illustrate this that are pretty powerful. So at some point I'll turn
Yeah.
Sherry, can I jump in just quickly and say to Joe, you and I have very similar paths, and I might add just quickly that I too went to a seminary and am Catholic, but my difference is I went through and was ordained. So I served a priest for almost 20 years, and that was like 40 years ago, though. So it's been a long time, but we have that in common in any event, and our concern for alleviating the suffering and the pain in the world. I think you expressed it eloquently.
Yeah, I was in Marino.
Oh, and Maryknoll. Okay, great. I love Maryknoll. I almost went to Maryknoll, in
Oh,
fact.
I might have met you there. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love, Joe, I know both of you brought something to read. And first, I want to check in with Brenda, because Brenda was the one who thought of having the two of you in conversation, which already we can see, like that was just so brilliant. And Brenda, I always love to just hear your background with the authors or anything that you want to share.
Well, this book with Joseph was born from Heart Wisdom, because he was in one of the early pandemic, early Heart Wisdom panels. And he was like, everything he said was electrifying to me today too. But those were such a strange time that you talking about sort of leveraging chaos and being able to surf through no matter what through your natural resilience was obviously very compelling to me, and I'm sure everyone else. So I followed up with you so about that next book idea. So I love that that Heart Wisdom will live on forever. And then also, I don't think I remembered, maybe it was way back in my unconscious or way down under. I don't think I remembered that they both were seminarians. And the bridge of psychology and spirituality is very much alive in these two men and their work. And I think of David as really early self-care, like in the 90s, but before the word self-care was bandied about. Perhaps it was bandied about by therapists and medical professionals, but I feel like he was the first that was just we're too busy, stop. You should stop and find ways to reflect, and maybe you need to just take a little moment in your busy work day and have a still point, which I did. I locked onto those still points and had a specific one where I would put natural essential oil on my wrist and then smell it for a minute and just bliss out to that sensory moment. But I also like the idea that he said well, sometimes you need to go to the mountaintop for a long time and really think things over and come back down. I sort of feel like our society needs to go to the mountaintop. And I was hoping we never planned things out. We had no idea that today would be after the shocking tragedy in that happened yesterday in Texas. But I actually think it's perfect that these two men are the ones that are talking, because I think there's a crisis with young men and boys in our country. Because if you look at the pattern, that's the pattern. It's teen boys are young in their 20s or something like that. And they, for whatever reason, they feel like they're loners, lone wolves. They get turned on to craziness on YouTube or whatever it is. And they feel linked to each other. And so I guess I wanted to ask this question of each of you. What can we do about this crisis of young men and boys where they're so lost that they don't even understand the meaning of life? And so I'm sorry to go I went all in, but I was looking forward to this all day because I knew you would have some wisdom.
Boys, I'm convinced of this. Young boys need older men, and they need older men to help them identify and express what they're feeling. I don't have any idea who this guy is who perpetrated that disaster yesterday in Texas, but I know one thing about him. He is not in touch with his feelings. He wouldn't know a feeling if he fell over it, except anger and frustration and that variety. but his feelings, and he has them, I'm convinced he has them, of love, of gentleness, of understanding, of tenderness, of care, but he can't access them. Older men have left him. Older men have not mentored him. Adults have abandoned him somewhere along the line. And this, I'm convinced, is what young men need: older men to care and to teach them the way of feelings and the way a man feels. Thus, this one of my books called Nothing's Wrong, A Man's Guide to Managing His Feelings. It takes you step by step through this process. So I'm sorry I just jumped in there, but anyway, I'm so convinced of that that it's urgent.
Well, I'd like to respond to that vein that we're going down here, because I do the first reading I wanted to share is about young men in prison. In Minnesota, we have a juvenile prison called Red Wing, and it's where murderers, gang members, felons are put. And my former business partner and colleague, Mavis Karn, and several of the Minnesota Vikings football players would go down there every Sunday and speak to them about the principles that I teach to these kids. And then afterwards, they would join a recidivism prevention group that Mavis ran. And so this is her story that she told about a meeting that she had with this whole group of kids. And some were Asian, some were Black, some were white, some were Native American. They were from all different races, all different gangs. They were talk about the differences. They were about as different. They hated each other before they learned these principles. So I'm going to just read, if that's okay. It's in the chapter Seeing Beyond Our Differences, and this section's called Prison and Gang Kids Find Common Ground and Discover Who They Truly Are. The kids learned in the class that they aren't what has happened to them. They aren't their bad habits. They aren't their diagnoses. They are pure potential. There's nothing wrong with them. Mavis Karn said that. Mavis has worked extensively with troubled kids in prison in the Minneapolis area. For a few years, she worked with an organization called The Missing Link, which had a contract with Red Wing Reformatory, a prison for youth under 18. She taught classes with a group of residents on a weekly basis for a period of 2 years. After these young offenders were released from prison, they attended a recidivism prevention group with Mavis. The impact of her group meetings far exceeded her expectations. On one occasion, I had about 16 kids from a variety of local gangs and prisons in the area. At the beginning of the class, one of the kids sitting next to me said, "G, can I talk?" The kid called her G. She's an elderly woman, short for OG, which means original gangster. You got to know Mavis. She works great with kids. Sure, she said. He pointed to each person in the group, saying their name and sometimes their gang affiliation, if he knew it. It used to be that y'all were my enemies, but now in my heart, I have love for all of you. Mavis said, I thought they would snicker, but they didn't say a thing for a minute or two. One by one, they began to talk about what the world would be like if everyone could learn what they now know. They imagined a world without war, because people wouldn't hate anymore. They wouldn't be fighting racism or poverty. There might be gangs, but they would be gangs for good. I never said another word for the rest of the hour, and neither did my 2 interns. After the class was over, the kids all went out for a pizza together. My interns and I sat in awe, taking in what had just happened. After Mavis related this incredible example of how discovering who you are and how we are all different yet the same can change all of our relationships, she then told me about a time when someone asked her, how do you work with kids from the the streets, prisons, and gangs when you don't have anything in common or speak their language? Her answer was quick and easy for her. If I had to think exactly the same as someone else in order to connect with them, then I'd have nobody to talk to. I was taken aback by her response, recognizing that it's a perfectly succinct example of separate realities that Sid Banks talked about in explaining the three principles. We reminisced about Sid's visit to Minneapolis, and in particular one visit when we joined Sid for lunch. He loved hearing the stories about many changes in the principles that made in people's lives, especially those less fortunate. Hearing that Mavis had worked with kids in the prisons and gangs, he returned to her with a smile and said, "Tell me more stories." After Mavis recounted several of the kids' stories, Sid was visibly moved. He leaned across and put his hand on Mavis's arm. He's Scottish. He spoke in his brogue and he says, "Don't ever forget the miracles, dearie." So that's the first story.
Lovely.
So what those kids learned was that they're not broken. And it reminded me of an interview I heard this morning on the radio. A woman who worked in that school in South Texas where the murders just happened, the mass shooting yesterday. And the governor had said, "That is evil incarnate. That child must have been pure evil." And she retorted, "Nobody is evil. No child is evil. We're all born innocent and pure, but with misunderstanding, with insecurity and fear, and not knowing how to access this resilience, this innate mental health that's available for all of us once we understand how our thoughts work, how mind works, and how to differentiate between our habit thinking, our ego, and this divine wisdom, this divine consciousness, going back to the spiritual, divine thought is available to us when we enter a state of no thought, peace of mind. And so that's what my book is about, is what's the paradigm in psychology now that points people to mental health and how to access that. Because once your mind is filled with love and understanding, which is your natural state, by the way, when you come across people with differences that don't agree with you, you feel compassion rather than judgment. You see their common humanity. Like when I meet with people of the opposite political party, not always, it's not always easy to do for me either, but I come back to that who they are, that we all have in common. We all have the same source, the same divine connection. And when I remember that, instead of focusing on how we think differently and believe differently, I feel nothing but a connection and compassion for them. And that usually lowers the temperature, opens the conversation, and understanding and clearing the air can happen. But when we polarize, we judge, we get full of hate and judgment and they, then we can't see beyond our differences. So that's, there's another story I'll read later about prisoners in a prison in California who were murderers, most of them, in for life, and how they learned these principles and how it transformed the guards by observing how they changed. But I'll share that a little later.
It's so powerful. I mean, I just really feel it. And I keep thinking, oh, I wish everyone were here to hear this conversation, right? It's so important. And we were talking a little bit before we went live about what Joe had just said about that, especially in the United States, it feels like we're all so quick to want to blame someone. And that, just like David had said, it's like there's almost no time to feel. It's like there's almost no time to feel the tremendous grief. Like when we just look at this one incident that happened yesterday, how much grief is attached to that. And then that goes back to what David was saying about, where are the mentors? Where are the people who are encouraging us to, to bridge those differences? Because we all feel that tragedy, right? I mean, it would be impossible not to. I'm open if anybody wants to jump in there.
Well, I was just trying to think of with this theme, bridging our differences or seeing beyond our differences is, I think we have to learn, first of all, just to listen, just to shut up. Don't say much, be quiet, be still, listen, and then ask questions, and then ask them. This is what I did with my nephew, who was an adult and very much politically opposite. Help me understand, and really mean it. And then assume, and this I think is important, assume their sincerity. Just as you want them to assume your sincerity, assume their sincerity and don't judge. You're not going to change them. One thing I kept in mind when I was talking to certain members of family is don't think you're going to change them. That's not going to happen. They're not going to change you. You're not going to change them. But maybe with your effort and their effort, maybe you'll begin to talk to each other. That's my goal now, is just let us talk. Let's not avoid the topic. It's dangerous territory. And as you said, Joseph, I don't know if I can do it or not, but I think it's worth a try.
Yeah, I love it that you emphasize deep listening, what I would call deep listening.
Mm.
Deep listening is really listening from a state of meditation, you could
Yes,
say.
of stillness.
You're listening with nothing on your mind. Your only intention is to want to understand. And when you have that, one of the stories I worked with the nursing union and the administration in a hospital that were deadlocked. The whole Twin Cities was on strike in the hospitals. And so Mavis and I went in and worked with the team of nurses who were the negotiating team. And all we did was teach them listening skills. We taught them how to listen to the other side with respect, with a curiosity, and try to understand their view. Just try to understand. They resolved their contract in 4 days.
Great.
The rest of the hospitals, it took 8 weeks.
Hmm.
And they got a much better deal than anybody else because they listened with respect and understanding. Because everybody on this call, everybody in the world lives in a separate reality of their own personal thought system. You could call it the ego or the personality, all of our habits, the way we were raised, life experiences, genetics, all of that figures into it, that we see life through a different set of eyes. We literally have a different perceptual filter. Mm-hmm. When we realize that we have in common, we all have a free will to choose what to believe in that we think. And we all have this innate capacity to have new thinking that's beyond our ego and beyond our personality, which is inspiration, insight, wisdom, God's mind. You could say it God, some people call it God mind. It's but when we drop into that deep listening, that meditative state, that just no thought state, that's when those thoughts come into us that help us bridge the gaps and see the common denominators, see the common humanity. And when people feel that, they feel love. And when they feel love, they relax around you and they begin to listen to you too.
Yes.
Because they feel heard and when people are speaking there, they hear truth. And when you're speaking from truth, it levels the playing field. It erases the differences. And it's so simple. Mm. Really, it's not a complicated thing that we're teaching this to kindergartners.
Right.
And CEOs of corporations and police, because it's just common sense.
It doesn't have to do with the intellect, does it? It has to do with the spirit.
No.
So following up exactly with what you were saying, Joe, my conviction too is that if we don't start these projects of communication and understanding one another from a call it a stopped position, from a point of view of equanimity in our own self, then we're doomed. We have to approach it being still, and we have to invite people into that stillness. And that's when you look at our world today, it's anything but still. It's running, it's going crazy. It's anxiety levels are soaring. And we all carry this societal anxiety. This event in Texas, it's affected every single person in this country, and we carry that stress. So what we need so importantly in our lives are these moments of silence and quietude to get in touch with our true self so that we can access others.
And the thing I would add to that, David, is that silence is always available, even in rush hour traffic, even in the
Absolutely, Joe. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
It's portable.
It's right. It's
You
portable.
don't have to wait to go meditate to find it, although
Exactly. Thank
it's lovely
you.
to meditate. But yeah.
And what I love about that too, David, I had pulled some quotes that were just exactly what you just said out loud from your book, but that the reason I pulled those quotes was because that's what I was thinking too, is that what you say about, we have to stop. And in that stopping, we choose to respond rather than react, right? Instead of just this kind of like, and to me, that really struck me because it seems like we are a culture of reacting,
Yes.
just like not. And when you did that just 1 minute of stopping at the beginning of this call, I was thinking like, what a gift. We need this desperately.
Yes, yeah. When I think of the gunman in this event in Texas, what Joe said is so. He's not evil. He's not evil. The line between good and bad, as Solzhenitsyn said, the line between good and bad runs through the hearts of every one of us, and all he needs is love. All he needs is someone to care. All he needs is someone to help him identify what he's feeling and express it in ways that are creative and loving. Desperate need.
When I was in my 20s, I was the prevention director in Texas for the Texas Commission on Alcoholism. And we studied resilience. All the research, a lot of what it's done actually at the University of Minnesota, they studied families that had physical abuse, alcoholism, incest, all really serious problems. And they were interested to see why were some kids that went through the exact same experience, why did they come out resilient and very successful and well-adjusted, and others were devastated by it? So they tracked those kids, and they found something this will support what you're saying, David. They found that each of those kids in different ways had someone that saw beyond their problem and their issues and loved them unconditionally.
Yes.
And believed in their potential. Could have been a scoutmaster, a neighbor,
a teacher, an aunt, an uncle, anybody,
a friend. It didn't matter.
Yeah.
Someone cared, and that was enough for them to believe in themselves. That someone else believes in me enough that I can begin to maybe believe in myself.
Right.
And that's what awakens that dormant resilience that's just covered up with a lot of insecurity and insecure thoughts. And when you light that spark, it has a multiplying effect.
Yes.
People see you differently when you have a transformation, when you have that change of heart. And they, like the guards at this prison in Santa Cruz County in California, my friend Beverly Wilson and another colleague of hers worked with the level 3 prisoners, the worst of the worst, and they just taught them these principles about resilience and how the mind works. And the prisoners went from being, incredibly uncooperative and always in trouble and always getting in lockdown and all that, having horrible fights with their families on family visits, to getting along with their family members when they came. They were happy. They were starting to treat the guards with respect, to the point that the guards demanded that the warden offer the same course for all the guards, because
Oh, really?
they wanted what the prisoners had.
Wow, wow. That's great.
Yeah.
So as we're talking about all this, what keeps coming up for me is, and both David and Joseph had said this before we went live, which is that we know what to do, right?
Yeah.
And so where is the obstacle in our way? Like, how can we know what to do as a society to help these people?
Distractions. People are distracted. People are taken off the track, and the world is screaming at them to look at this and look at that and be this and go there and get that and buy that, and it's screaming at people, and they're hearing it because their screams are very effective. They're researched, and they know what they're doing.
The algorithms are pretty smart.
These distractions, they're marketing. They know exactly what they're doing, and we're hearing them, and we're distracted, and we don't have access to the wisdom that exists in us, that we're born with, as Joe was saying so clearly. These kids, when they know, when they're cared for, when they're seen, they change. Yes. That's what's, I guess, in a way so sad. All this stuff is very available. We don't have to live this way. We have to shut up first. We have to be still, and we have to be comfortable with our own selves and our own individualness. I just got, am I still on?
You're
Yes.
still here, very much so.
Okay. Oh, there it is. Okay. Somehow something happened to so yes. Be here now.
Yeah.
Joe, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, there's something I really love to read. I just had a couple I worked with yesterday, and he was, acted out sexually and had an affair, blah, blah. Ended up as a prostitute, was all over the front page of the news, and, big public thing, a public official, and, just about destroyed his marriage. But she hung in there, he hung in there, but he still hadn't forgiven himself. And so that lack of forgiveness was preventing him from receiving his love, the love that his wife had for him. So I read him this from this chapter called Love and Forgiveness. From my mentor, Sydney Banks, wrote this book called The Missing Link. He wrote lots of books, but this is I call it his greatest hits book. And so is it okay if I just take a minute to read this? Because it's very, very powerful.
Of course, please, Joe, go ahead. Yeah.
It's the essence. So the chapter is called Love and Forgiveness. Love and understanding harmonize the mind of humanity to its true inner nature. What you give in life is what you receive. To give love is to receive love. A mind full of love and good feelings can never go wrong. Love and forgiveness go hand in hand. Without them, life is encumbered by ill feelings and unhappiness. Judging your own faults or the faults of others leads to unhappiness. A mind that dwells in non-judgment is a contented mind. A heart full of love is void of all judgment and is filled with divine spirit. Forgiveness is divine and has wonderful effects on our lives. Forgiveness is a powerful remedy to clear thoughts of negative memories. It frees us from the emotional prisons of our past, providing opportunities to start life anew. Forgiveness brings forth peace of mind. Without forgiveness, the road through life is paved with doubt and misery. An unforgiving mind burdens one with negative thoughts, holding on to yesterday's hurts It contaminates and prevents the thinker from living a happy life now. It is forgiveness that allows you to see today as a new experience. God has already forgiven you for yesterday's mistakes, so why don't you forgive yourself? To dwell on past trials and tribulations is to deny this moment. If you live in the past, you can never find happiness. You are trying to live in a reality that no longer exists. It is a misconception to think that if you forgive someone who has harmed you, you are somehow condoning their behavior, making yourself vulnerable so that you will allow them to repeat their hurtful action. This is not so. There is a vast difference between forgiving a person and forgiving an act. Forgiveness releases you from mental anguish and pain and all the horrible negative feelings an unforgiving mind experiences. When you learn to forgive, you see with clarity the ignorance and the innocence of those who trespass against you or see life differently. You realize that hanging on to old grudges is like a miser in deep water, clutching a bag of fool's gold, unaware that the fool's gold is just heavy, useless rocks weighing them down. There is no way to guarantee a trouble-free life. Life is like any other contact sport. You may encounter hardships of one sort or another. Wise people find happiness not in the absence of such hardships, but in their ability to understand them when they occur.
So that was lovely. Thank you for sharing that. And I realize like this is not quite fair for me to bring this up like when we don't have that much time, but it's connected to my original question. I feel like, and you guys are both sophisticated, like psychological thinkers, so I think you'll have some insight. I think there's been an infantilization of adults like for some decades, but particularly I see it in men. Like I will, I'm not a man hater, but like, over the pandemic when the only place I was going was like, standing in line and with my mask on to like go buy groceries, I felt like very, we were supposed to separate from people that caused enough distance for me to just be an observer. And I would just think, I would see like oftentimes like middle-aged men with their mask below their nose or their mask below their chin. And like they were dressed like toddlers. Like that's the thing I've noticed for decades is that like men and dress like toddlers. And I even developed like this thing in my mind, like, don't be that guy. That guy is like sort of oblivious, self-centered, like probably mostly a jerk. And I know I'm sounding really harsh. I'm just telling you what I was thinking. And I think that like somehow in our society, like, there's a coddling of young people and like maybe especially young men or something, and it's backfired because they're not mature, they're not men. Maybe that's part of like the mentoring of older men is like it teaches you how to be a man. But like, I mean, even in my little East Bay neighborhood, San Francisco, Bay Area, there's a lot of that guy, and they're not grown-ups. They're not like how did the infantilization happen, and is there anything we can do about it? I know that's a huge question to lob out, but
that's a huge question, but it's emotional immaturity. I believe it's emotional immaturity, and these guys, the typical jerk that you're talking about, and we see a lot of them, and sometimes we even are them, is maybe I'm a Johnny One Note here, but it has to do with their emotional immaturity. They've never learned how to express their valid and very real feelings. So they bottle them up, and they're going to come out Feelings are going to come out one way or another. They're going to come out either on their own or under your control. And when they come out of your control, they're going to cause trouble, and they're going to be jerks. And I'm convinced that's the basis of it, is emotional immaturity. Men have not learned emotional language in our culture. Women have, much better than men have. And then women try to teach it to men, but often that doesn't work. Mothers can't teach sons what fathers can teach sons, but the fathers are absent because they didn't get it from their father. It's a self-growth kind of thing. So I'm convinced, Brenda, that's the answer. It's sort of an intellectual answer, but I think that's really what most men are struggling with, is they don't know how to express their feelings, and they're embarrassed if they're feelings that seem to be feminine, that are classically seen as feminine. They're not masculine or feminine, but I think a lot of men see it that way, and so they
Like
emphasize
empathy, they're too tough for empathy. Like
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, they can't feel with. That's true. Empathy. They don't, absolutely. So the solution: help men mentor young men. Robert Bly, who's long since gone, but a lovely poet and psychologist, this was his strong emphasis. And I think he wrote the book called Sibling Society, and was that young men need old men to mentor them and to teach them. I think this is at least a step in that direction.
Thank you.
Can I respond to that too?
Please. Yeah.
Yeah, I think whether we're men or women or trans or whatever we are, we all have a common essence that's not male or female. That is our soul. You could say if be spiritual here, it's our soul essence. But we all have a brain. We all live in families, we all live in a society, we all get conditioned to think in different ways that can cover up that humanity, that essence, that soul. And when that happens, we create belief systems like you can't ever show weakness, or you can't show vulnerability, or if you're a woman, you can't show strength. Then you'll be a bitch, or whatever. There's a
Uppity women.
Got to walk within your zone here. So men and women both have covered up their soul, their essence. So when we recognize who we really are, that it's full, whole, and complete, our soul essence is already there, and that's our true identity. And then when we have thoughts that come through our mind that create emotional reactions, so when a thought comes through the mind, it isn't just a thought, it creates a vibration throughout the body. We call that energy in motion, or emotion. So our emotions, in a way, are part of the operating system that allows us to know when we're coming from our soul essence and when we're coming from our ego, when we're coming from our divided essence. And when you begin to discern that, it's like recognizing when a note is in tune, and you don't have to be a musician to know when something's out of harmony. You can hear a discordant note. And the same thing is with our feelings. When we're in harmony with our spirit, with our spiritual essence, we naturally live in love and understanding. But when we have negative emotions, anger, hurt, jealousy, etc., just observing those without judgment, like in meditation, when a thought passes through your mind, don't wrestle with it, don't try to change it, just observe it and let it pass. If there's something there for you to see insightfully, you will get an insight, you will have a revelation. So trying to control the thinking is not the answer. But also not acting on every thought that comes through your head as true is not the answer, because there's a lot of bullshit in here. There's a lot of contamination in our thought systems, a lot of prejudice, a lot of judgment, a lot of repression and guilt. And, you're Catholic, I don't know about you, but I have a PhD in guilt. Some learned in the seminary. So as we begin to recognize that our experience, our feelings are coming from our thinking, that's our creation, that's our free will, then we begin to discern what is coming from essence and what is coming from habit. And that's the way we decontaminate the mind. We spiritualize the mind. We return it to its original state. It's not original sin, it's original wellness. It's original spirit. And that, to me, is that's when being a man is, or a woman, or a bi, or whatever, isn't something you can define. It's just something that's created in the moment naturally. And when you're being your natural essence, then you're free. Then you're in harmony with other people as well. You're able to have naturally love, natural compassion, natural creativity, natural courage in the face of war, for example, in Ukraine. The unbelievable courage that they're exhibiting. I can't even fathom how I could do that.
Really?
But the whole society is doing it. There ain't no way we're giving up here. It's like, wow, and you're facing starvation, annihilation, constant bombing, and yet they have total hope. It's quite a
It is.
demonstration.
It's wonderful. It's a real gift.
It's the most best advertisement for resilience I've ever seen.
Yeah, yeah.
I hate to say this, but we've actually reached.
Oh, no.
I know. Listen, I want to nominate both of you for political positions, if that's, we'll talk offline, but I just keep thinking, right? Like we need this kind of leadership. We need this kind, and I'm so grateful, Brenda, let me just say this whole time I keep thinking, this is a still point, right? These heart wisdom panels are a still point because they give us a chance to stop, whatever we were each doing before we came here, and to listen to people, that Joe and David and all of our authors, I feel, just bringing that presence and that stopping and the stillness and the mindfulness. So Brenda, hallelujah to you.
They're deep conversations. I mean, I have benefited enormously from today, enormously, because I'll rethink when I'm feeling judgy wedgy at Safeway again, behind a maskless guy in like a toddler outfit. I'll say, okay.
I love your description, Brenda.
Yeah, and I just, again, thank you. Thanks to David and Joe, Brenda, Bree and Shelby, Liz Marie and Loretta for being here. I know one of the big things I took so many notes, and it's just like that I want to make sure that I get this replay into the world as much as I possibly can. I hope we'll all do that. This is really important.
It is.
Yeah.
Thank you guys. You really brought it. You were what the doctor ordered today for sure. I feel like because my heart felt all sort of clenched up and like it eased during this hour.
Thank you. Good matchmaker, Brenda, as Sherry said in the very beginning before you put us together.
Yeah, thank you very much for that.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, you're the best of yentas, Brenda.
One old wannabe priest and one old priest.
That's it.
Oh, thank you.
You lasted a lot longer. I only lasted 9 months.
I lasted 10 years. No, 20 years.
Oh my goodness. God bless you.
Thank you so much. Come back.
Thank you.
Wednesday.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Yeah.